a day. A million ladies with me, couple million away. My hands forever itchy. What? You kinda stuck, not moving? You're out of luck? Let me show you how to get a reality candidate. Plus, the keys I found.
Oh, hey Tucson. Didn't see you there. Welcome back to another action-packed and informative episode of the 5 on 20 News. It is Wednesday, November 29th, and we are coming to you live from the Creative Tucson Studios in downtown Tucson. First, let's talk local headlines. Arizona Representative Raul Grijalva reportedly arranged for a staffer to be given a severance package worth over $48,000 after she threatened a lawsuit, according to the Washington Times. The employee, who was unnamed in the report, claims that Grijalva was often drunk at work and created a hostile work environment. Raul, what gives? The settlement was negotiated after Grijalva's office stopped paying the female staffer in order to force her to the table. Grijalva told the Daily Star that none of the allegations against him were sexual in nature. This was a reference to the recent sexual harassment allegations that have hit Democratic lawmakers John Conyers and Al Franken in recent weeks. Grijalva sought an apology from the conservative Washington Times late Tuesday, accusing them of trying to group him in with these recent sexual harassment allegations. However, he did acknowledge that the payment was given to the former staffer. He also acknowledged that he was, quote, tore up for most of the time he's been in office, which still makes him more competent than 98% of Congress. Death rates in Arizona from drugs, alcohol, and suicides could grow by 38%, according to a recent report by the Trust for America's Health and Well-Being. The study used data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to predict that by 2025, deaths from the three causes could reach over almost 76 per 100,000 people. That would be the 8th highest rate in the U.S., although the growth rate would be lower than the national average if the current pace of deaths continue. The report says that the death rate would grow by 41% by 2025, and that drugs, alcohol, and suicides would claim a total of 1.6 million American lives. John Auerbach, one of the authors of the study, said that, quote, like the rest of the country, in Arizona the rates are disturbingly high and are predicted to increase unless there is a significant change in terms of the trends we've seen. The report calls on states to adopt a national resilience strategies composed of 60 policies and practices and programs to slow the number of preventable deaths. These include requiring physicians to search a prescription drug monitoring program before prescribing opioids and allow people to get naloxone, a drug that can stop opioid overdoses. You can read all about it in the report titled Happy, Happy, Fun Things and Other Hullabaloo. Newsweek calls it a breezy, fun beach read full of wacky characters and lots of naloxone. Former Maricopa County Sheriff Joe Arpaio will be back in court next month over allegations that he pursued a criminal case to embarrass Arizona Senator Jeff Flake. One of Flake's sons filed a malicious prosecution lawsuit against old Sheriff Joe. He claims that Arpaio pursued felony animal cruelty charges against him and his then wife in an attempt to do political damage to the senator and gain publicity. Austin Flake and his wife were charged in the heat exhaustion deaths of 21 dogs in June of 2014 at a kennel operated by his in-laws. The Flakes were watching the dogs when the in-laws were out of town. The dogs died when an air conditioning unit failed in a small room where the animals spent the night. The case against the Flakes was dismissed at the request of the prosecutors after the owners of the kennel pleaded guilty to animal cruelty charges. This was after an expert determined that the air conditioner failed because it was not properly maintained. Austin Flake's lawsuit against Arpaio alleges that the former sheriff sought to link the Flakes with the dog's death. Arpaio ordered surveillance on the senator's home and allegedly had his staff examine phone records to see if Austin had called his father during the time he was watching the dogs. In a deposition, Arpaio said that while he was unable to find any evidence to support his case, he still expressed confidence in the investigation. Austin says that Arpaio was driven by political reasons in seeking charges against he and his wife. Jeff Flake has long been an adversary of Arpaio because of his opposition to the sheriff's immigration policies. Flake's criticism of Donald Trump also didn't help. Arpaio has long been a supporter of Trump and was pardoned by the president earlier this year after he was found guilty of contempt of court after disobeying a judge's orders. Arpaio gained infamy when he was found to have housed prisoners in a tent village that critics said violated basic human rights. Arpaio was found to have forced prisoners to stay in tents that could get up to 125 degrees inside, with many of the tents having non-functioning fans. However, some prisoners found a way to gain Arpaio's favor by walking around on 4 legs and humping his leg. Ugh. 6 Middle Eastern men caught at the Arizona-Mexico border were cleared of terrorism charges, according to documents obtained by the Associated Press. The arrest set off an alarm on some right-wing blogs and other media outlets, and Governor Doug Ducey called it a matter of national security. But the documents show that the men were actually fleeing violence and persecution from their homelands. The documents show that the men were also physically and verbally abused by 2 Mexican smugglers and went days without food and water. According to the documents, the men all cooperated with the government and 4 were deported. The remaining 2 are in removal proceedings, according to an Immigration and Customs Enforcement agent. Blogs around the country claimed that the 5 men from Pakistan and 1 from Afghanistan were members of ISIS and sounded alarm that our southern border could be used as a terrorist expressway. The arrests came around the same time that 2 Syrian families with children showed up at the border seeking asylum as they claimed they were Christian and fleeing persecution. Following their arrests, Donald Trump tweeted, 8 Syrians were just caught on the southern border trying to get into the U.S. ISIS maybe? I told you so. We need a big and beautiful wall. But none of these cases had any ties to terrorism. We also never got that big and beautiful wall. 3 days after the arrest of the 6 men, Ducey issued a statement saying that the arrests were troubling, quote, especially in light of new threats on the United States from ISIS in a video released in the last 24 hours. When hearing about the dismissal of the case, Ducey apologized, saying he'd happily welcome the 6 men back into the country once they stop being Middle Eastern. Sounds reasonable? Policies on the use of body cameras in the Tucson, Phoenix, and Mesa police departments could enable the abuse of technology, according to a recent report by the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. The organization looked into body camera policies to see if police departments are conforming to the principles and adequately protecting civil rights and liberties. Not to spoil the twist, but they aren't. The report found that departments were failing to safeguard civil rights. The report gave failing grades to all 3 departments for their body camera policies. In fact, all 75 police departments in the study failed. Maybe the Leadership Conference just happens to be a tough grader because Arizona police departments claim that the study was, quote, filled with inaccuracies that exceeded what the Justice Department requires. Sergeant Jonathan Howard of the Phoenix Police Department gave an example of an inaccuracy, claiming that the report says the department doesn't post their body camera footage policy online, even though it does. The report was based on 8 safeguards developed by the organization. They include whether the policy allows officers to view footage before they file a report, whether an officer has control of the camera when it's recording, and whether the public can gain access to the footage. On a positive note, Tucson passed 3 of the safeguards, which is better than the other 2 police departments in Arizona. So we failed, but at least we failed the best. The American Civil Liberties Union of Arizona is suing the Phoenix Police Department, demanding it releases public records related to President Trump's campaign rally in Phoenix. Reportedly, the ACLU of Arizona has received hundreds of complaints from people who witnessed and or suffered from Phoenix Police Department's extreme tactics against protesters. Legal director for ACLU, Kathy Brody, said, quote, the PD failed to protect the First Amendment rights of demonstrators. The ACLU has submitted 2 public recorded requests to the Phoenix Police Department, with the first being submitted over 12 weeks ago. The department has refused to provide any response to those requests, but has admitted that it has gathered records responsive to the ACLU of Arizona's requests and has publicly used those records to refute claims of police malfeasance during the protest. Now in national and international news, 5 medical centers within the Veterans Affairs system failed to report 8 potentially dangerous doctors to a national database, according to a government investigation. The Government Accountability Office found that of 9 medical providers who had actions taken against them, 8 weren't reported to the National Practitioner Data Bank. The database collects information about the professional conduct and competence of providers and is meant to keep these providers from finding a job in another state, which is pretty much what happened, except in some cases, the bad doctors didn't even have to find another state. In one example, a clinician who resigned during an investigation later found a job at a private hospital in the same city. Not surprising, the doctor was later fired for a similar offense. The report also found that the VA was slow to review providers after concerns were raised about their conduct. According to the report, the VA did not start reviews for 16 providers for 3 months to multiple years after complaints were made. They also found that 148 reviews were not documented. Worst of all, hospitals failed to investigate doctors with names like Dr. High AF, Dr. Gassengrope, and Dr. I Gots Ill Trail Mix. U.S. forces carried out an airstrike against the Islamic State in Somalia on Monday, killing 1 fighter, according to a U.S. African Command press release. The U.S. forces have stepped up airstrikes in Somalia in recent weeks, carrying out at least 6 this month and about 30 since the start of the year. This included airstrikes in April that killed a group of civilians, including children. The U.S. has been helping local forces fighting the al-Qaeda-affiliated Shahab for years. But attacks increased largely because of a Trump administration policy that gives more latitude for military leaders to dictate policy. This has led to increased strikes in Afghanistan and Libya, where ISIS has also had a presence. But the strikes have increased as ISIS is losing their foothold in Syria because, hey, we've got to bomb someone. Fun fact, a single U.S. airstrike costs about $2.5 million between the weapons, manufacturing, and the air power needed to deliver it. This $2.5 million airstrike was used to kill 1 man. According to estimates, killing every member of Shahab will cost $123 bajillion. Ports of entry in Yemen are starting to see aid about 3 weeks after a blockade by Saudi Arabia. A container ship stocked with 25,000 tons of wheat arrived on Monday, along with a ship with nearly 2 million vaccines. Yemen has been hit with an epidemic of cholera, with more than 900,000 people suffering from the disease since the outbreak earlier this year. The vaccines are enough to vaccinate about 600,000 children. At the same time, the aid group Save the Children estimates that there are about 500,000 malnourished children in the country under the age of 5 who will die from hunger or disease this year. Yemen is in the midst of a civil war between the central government and the opposition Houthis, who have taken over large sections of the country. Saudi Arabia supports the central government against the Iranian-backed Houthis. The U.S. has provided material assistance to Saudi Arabia in the form of weaponry and other military equipment. Meanwhile, in Yemen, a group of women calling themselves the Abductees Mothers Association are protesting the arrest and disappearance of young men. In one recent protest, the group banged spoons on plates outside the office of the country's High Commissioner for Human Rights. The group was formed about 2 years ago in response to an increase in the number of people arrested and disappeared in Yemen's civil war. Since the start of the war, activists and journalists who criticize militias have routinely been imprisoned on both sides. Some journalists in the capital city of Sana'a have been in jail for years, in many cases without a trial. The Trump administration says that it will study the crisis to figure out how the government gets away with imprisoning fake news journalists. How do they do it? TV host Salvador Nasralla is projected to win the presidential race in Honduras, an upset to the incumbent Juan Orlando Hernandez, who's backed by the U.S. Nasralla heads a left-right coalition called the Opposition Alliance Against the Dictatorship. The group claims that Hernandez has used increasingly autocratic methods to fight crime in a country plagued by gang violence. Nasralla is backed by former Honduran President Manuel Zelaya, who was removed in a 2009 coup supported by the U.S. Since then, Hernandez has touted his success in lowering the country's murder rates and lifting economic growth. But Hernandez was hurt by recent reports that his security minister was running drugs. The information was revealed during a court case involving 2 nephews of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Ironically, the U.S. has been targeting the Venezuelan government for drug running, but ended up outing a member of the U.S.-backed Hernandez government. Strangely, the storyline was also used in a 1994 episode of Friends. From guzzling water to pesticide pollution, growing weed illegally isn't great for the environment. A new study published in the journal Frontiers in Ecology and the Environment shows that it can be even worse for the environment than logging. That's because illegal pot grow ops are typically buried deep in the woods, irregular in size and shape, and are usually scattered about in no particular order, causing permanent damage to what should be the most protected part of the forest, its core. These grow ops tend to punch a bunch of small holes in the forest, whereas logging tends to wipe out larger chunks around its edges. The center of the forest is held in such high regard because it is surrounded by trees, sheltered from heavy winds, radiation, and evaporation. The area is usually shadier and cooler, making it an optimal home for many woodland creatures. But because the data in the study only goes back to 2013, researchers have no idea what legalizing recreational pot would do for the environment. The hope is that legalizing pot will root out the need for these illegal grow ops, making Swiss cheese out of our forest. Legalize pot, save the environment. Easy choice, right? A White House memo justifying the takeover of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was written by an attorney who worked for a payday lender, according to a report in The Intercept. Stephen A. Engel wrote the memo for the Office of Legal Counsel, which says that the Trump administration can appoint Nick Mulvaney as the head of the agency. The Intercept states that Engel was one of two lead counsels for NDG Financial Corp., a Canadian payday lender, which the Consumer Protection Bureau cited for running a 9-year scheme to use its foreign status to offer Americans high-interest loans. Why does it matter who he worked for? By weakening the Bureau, Engel's old company, NDG Financial, would be free to run more schemes like they were caught doing. This all began on Friday when the CFPB head Richard Cordray announced his resignation and appointed his deputy head Leandra English as the new leader. However, 2 days later, Donald Trump said that he would be appointing Mulvaney, who was head of Trump's Office of Budget Management. In the past, Mulvaney has called the agency, which he's now running, a sick joke. Critics charge that Mulvaney will help ensure the demise of the agency, which has been a target of Republicans since its founding in 2009. On Monday, there was confusion as to who was actually in charge. Mulvaney told employees to ignore any instructions from English, while English launched a lawsuit against the Trump administration to insist that she's in charge. On Tuesday, a judge sided with the Trump administration, ruling that the president has the authority to name a new director of the agency. But, you know, your first week at a new job is always the toughest. If there's something weird and it don't look good, who are you going to call? If you happen to be a government-employed scientist, there's at least one safe place. A new hotline has been set up to help expose any anti-science actions under the Trump presidency. The Trump administration is arguably one of the most anti-science in history, with recent actions like EPA head Scott Pruitt citing the Bible and banning scientists who receive EPA funding from sitting in the agency's advisory groups. As a result of shady happenings like this, 314 Action, a political advocacy group that is helping scientists run for office, has set up this hotline and also reached out to 30,000 EPA, NASA, and NSF scientists to let them know who to call. Jumping on board, law firm Garvey Schubert Barrer is offering services pro bono to make sure every claim is run through the proper legal channels. If you have any information to share, go to speakoutforscience.org. And I wanted to take just a moment to talk about the program you're watching right now. Here at 5 on 20, we're undertaking a new kind of citizen journalism. We're going to give you the news as we see it, and we want more people to speak up with us. We need writers, hosts, anchors, camera people, sound people, the whole schlemiel. The times require a new way of informing ourselves, so do it. Join us. Do it now. Email us at info@creativetucson.org to get involved. And if you think there's a story we're missing, a person we should interview, an upcoming event we should cover, or have any news tips for us, shoot an email to info@creativetucson.org. We are here for you, and we want to cover all stories from all points of view. So don't be strangers. This was 5 on 20 News with Luc Goodhart. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to all our social media accounts for all the latest Creative Tucson news and content. And again, feel free to bother us at info@creativetucson.org. Thanks for watching, and stay creative, Tucson. I've been a couple of light years from any nigga that wanted to serve me, so God, they pooped though. Breaking